Please tell me if I'm assigning things that you guys don't want to read or whatever. I'll try and do better because I normally just throw things in there and don't think about it. But David is making me feel like I should be thinking more about
Well,
it.
you probably should.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to News from the Real World, where we talk about the top 10 comment-generating posts on the blog this week. My name is Parker. I am a second-year stage and production management grad student.
My name is Grace. I'm a first-year costume design grad student.
My name is Izzy. I'm a second-year scenic design grad student.
My name is Evan. I'm a first-year scenic design grad.
I'm Hannah. I'm a third-year sound design grad.
So I have the first article this week, and it was a fun read. Well, not super fun, but Cirque du Soleil permanently closes Zumanity after 17 years on the Las Vegas Strip. So it was actually a sad read. I got my two articles mixed up. It basically just tells the story about the announcement that Cirque made last week, I believe, from when this recording comes out, that Zumanity closed. And when the pandemic started, they had 6 shows open. Zumanity, The Beatles' Love, Calm, Stare, and Michael Jackson won. And this was the first show to actually close. So Zumanity came out. There were 120 artists, crew members, and staff that worked on the production. And it had been running since September 2003. There were 7.25 million audience members over the course of the run. So this was a massive show. We actually got to talk in class with a couple of stage managers that worked with Cirque du Soleil to talk about their experience. And the company released a major statement talking about prioritizing the entertainers and the actors and the staff they have. But that this was a decision that had to unfortunately be made. It was really a short article, just kind of talking about this closed production. It was sad to see.
I can't imagine they've had many shows in the last 8 months.
Right.
No, it's really sad. I actually was in Las Vegas this summer, and I was staying with 2 people. One is a wardrobe person on the Beatles' Love, and the other one's a assistant stage manager for the Michael Jackson 1 show. And it was so hard to hear the stories because most of these people, they're trained, especially the artists, which is what they call the acrobats and the performers, they don't have anywhere else to go for work. They're so exclusively trained. And for the longest time, they weren't telling people what was going on with their work. They were sort of getting emails on you're on standby. So they were able to get unemployment for a while, but then they let people go. And so people sort of stayed there all summer with nothing to do, thinking, kind of being led on that the show was going to open. And then it just kept getting torn apart over and over again. So pretty much the whole company for every single show has been out of work. Kind of all of Las Vegas, because it's an entertainment industry, has been on unemployment since the pandemic started.
I think a lot of non-entertainment industry people see theater and circus people as being young people who could do other things with their lives if they wanted to. But a lot of people are career professionals who've been in the industry for decades and decades. I think it's an important thing to remember. I'm surprised, and I guess we should be grateful that Cirque du Soleil hasn't had to close down any of their other permanent installation shows. Zumanity had a really significant run, it sounds like, before closing for this reason. And they still have 4 or 5 other shows in Las Vegas. So I guess fingers crossed that those ones survive as well.
They did file for bankruptcy in June, if you guys remember that when that came out.
And the fear is that if they open, they cannot, as a company, handle another shutdown. So if they open a show and it has to close down, that show will pretty much close. So it's just very fear-based right now on deciding how to move forward.
Remember back in April when we thought we were going to have this all cleared up by summer?
I'm gonna cry, Hannah, stop.
Well, I guess speaking of theaters closing, this next article, it is titled "The Necessity of Pivoting," published on HowlRound, written by Janice Rabian on November 16th. So Janice is an MFA costume design student right now, just about to graduate. And basically, was, very excited for her career, these gigs lined up. And then, of course, in March, the pandemic hit and everything was canceled. And so she quickly had to sort of make plans on what to do post grad, and ended up getting this paid research job through the university to research the effect of the pandemic on the theater industry. So her goal was originally to interview 50 theaters, regional theaters, but was only able to interview 30 across 10 different states. And the breakdown of the research basically just touches on like those theaters that chose to either close, those that went straight to virtual programming, and sort of how they're handling the response from their audiences and the community. So she talks a little bit about the theaters who do the virtual programming. That includes things like improv or like book clubs where they read plays, and focusing a little more on like outreach through education, which I think, is all great. But then the surrounding the murder of George Floyd this summer, she actually pivoted a lot of her questions to, well, what are you as a theater company doing to serve the the BIPOC communities in your area? And so I thought that was really interesting, but I think a very smart way to kind of like progress the research a little bit. And based on her interviews, it sounds like a lot of the BIPOC led theaters seem to have done the best job at sort of addressing these topics, and making them like an integral part of their mission and programming. So, some of that is like you have some theaters who are now like completely getting rid of subscription services, because that's sort of created to help. I mean, the only people who are benefiting off of it are the upper middle class white audiences who come see the shows. So yeah, I thought it was interesting that the article kind of like ended up circling to that. But I guess on the topic of pivoting, it's just sort of like at young professionals, like at what point do we make this decision to pivot our careers and or stick it out in theater? And she seems to end it on kind of a hopeful note, like, maybe focusing a little bit more on like how am I going to incorporate these practices into my art and career. So yeah, and I mean I agree. I don't think there's any like resolution to it, because as we know, we're still in it, so it's not over. And a lot of student comments mentioned just like the Zoom fatigue and exhaustion, and just like how pivot, like a lot of students, especially at CMU, have like considered like changing or kind of pivoting their career pathway post grad, because they're not as optimistic maybe that we'll be at full swing in a few years. So yeah, I agree. There, I don't think I don't know. I haven't been compelled enough yet to be like, I really, what I could really use right now? Some Zoom theater. So, or just at the end of the day, I don't know. I haven't reached a point where I'm like craving it,
Mhm.
I think I think very little of the things that I've seen come out of this virtual theater moment we're having are things that I want to see people continue to explore when we can meet in person again. I think that most people recognize that it's not a perfect solution, and I'm glad that a lot of people have made stuff available for free in the name of continuing to have a brand as opposed to continuing to have profits. Although I think theaters deserve profits as well. There was a production of, I think the Geffen was broadcasting a production of like a new production of Christmas Carol last night, and available for the rest of the upcoming month as well. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. I don't like Christmas Carol, but this was like a interesting visuals, and it was one actor playing all the roles, and creatives I liked. And I went to like try to get my family on board, and I was like, oh, tickets are $50. Like, I'm not doing that for Christmas Carol.
Yeah, I mean that's
There's
steep.
so many Christmas carols to watch.
There
for
are,
free
yeah.
online.
I
The
briefly saw
Muppets.
The Muppets,
Muppets.
Muppets Christmas Carol is excellent.
a classic.
Yeah.
I briefly saw online that there was a version of Christmas Carol going around specifically with the intention of benefiting nonprofit theaters and like sending the proceeds all around. Is that the one you're talking about, or did I see something different?
Oh, that's the same one. Yeah. So the money goes to local nonprofit
Local.
theaters to you. So you put in your zip code and then they find people to send the money to. So it's a good cause, and maybe I shouldn't be upset about it.
No,
I mean, it's a good cause.
That's a good cause to just give them the money and then not bother watching it.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, that's a steep price, especially for like graduate students, you know, like I'm not knocking that at all. It's
definitely
Mom,
still
Dad.
catering to like the rich older audience, you know. It's
Yeah.
hard to find things for people around our age and like young artists being compelled
Yeah.
to do these things.
And the article also mentions it's like if you can watch Hamilton on Disney Plus and you just have to pay $7 a month. Like, what are people going to be willing to pay for live theater over Zoom? So
Yeah, it's the same old problem when suddenly you're competing with not just other theaters but also every theater, because the internet's is small in some ways, and also everything on Netflix and everything on Disney Plus and everything on TV, right? Like suddenly you're competing with blockbuster movies, and you're reading a play on Zoom. It's hard. There's a
I
sorry.
did see a theater company in Cincinnati. I can't remember the name of the theater company. Have been doing live performances of a 2-person show that they like videotape and record, which was actually really well done. And I know, I mean, it wasn't like Zoom theater, but this group of people made a horror film completely using Zoom, not audio, but like Zoom visuals.
Mm-hmm.
Like the entire thing was Zoom recorded. So like they were all in the boxes.
Oh, that sounds cool. But I think that a lot of the things that theater artists are suddenly experimenting with are experimental film.
Essentially, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
what's funny is that, I was just thinking about how the theater I used to work at would do these things, would do the NT lives, the National Theater Lives, where people would show up, they would pay money to sit in the theater, but watch like a recorded version
I've done
of a Shakespeare or, whatever that the NT Live has recorded. And it's just so funny. But I guess that just goes to show like how we place the value of the experience on like the gathering, right? It's like the kind of ritualistic feeling of like, going to a space, the lights dimming, everyone kind of collectively having the same emotions or, having an emotional response to the work. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think gathering is so much part of it. I think that the things that I've seen that have done it well, I think I've talked about this in the podcast before, create a feeling of community. Like there's a comment box or there's a way to see other people. And as a theater designer, visual designer, I like it when there's visual elements
That's
as
true.
well.
Record your show. Don't do whatever the hell this is.
Right. Yeah.
So our next article takes us to California, and it's called "Why I Resigned from the California Arts Council in the Middle of a Pandemic." It's by Sarah Rafael Garcia, who is a Chicana artist, activist, and author who was hired in February, just weeks before the COVID-19 pandemic. And she was excited to work with this company because the environment was approximately 70% people of color. Since she started working there, 6 workers have since resigned, and out of the 6, 5 were people of color. The article goes on to share a lot of like her personal experience in explaining what led up to her resignation, why she resigned, and what she hopes changes afterwards. Before being a program specialist, she was actually a grant panelist, and she would review grant applications. That was her background and experience. And she noticed a huge gap in the number of people of color writing grants and the number of people of color receiving grants. So she hoped that becoming the specialist position would allow her to change this obvious bias and make it represent the actual percent of grants that are being received. And during her time on the council, she saw a ton of issues with the grant process and followed the correct chain of action to report them and publicize them and speak to her boss about what was going wrong. And a couple of things she lists are that there's a lack of transparency and accountability in how the grants were administered. she was asked to approve final reports without ever reviewing them or reading them in the first place, which is like illegal with the program. There were unbalanced budgets, and there were grant proposals that weren't finished. Like, they didn't sign them, but they still gave that person a grant, even though they didn't complete the grant. And then the second half of the article sort of goes into her personal story, where she got really sick and put in her like week's notice. And her boss actually said that they were going to publicly announce her resignation without her permission, since she didn't show up for work because she was sick during the COVID pandemic. So she tried to take legal action, and just like a lot of stuff that was really frustrating the article. And then there was this quote that I really stood out to me. It says, as underserved residents of California, BIPOC, grassroots, and LGBTQIA+ artists and communities, you should be receiving the majority of state funding. Prior to this upcoming grant cycle, approximately 68% of council funding went to 1 million plus nonprofit organizations, predominantly white-led. So the article is essentially just exposing the reality. It's not, and it's a little bit of a call to action, but it's more what we talked about in a couple past articles with like salary transparency. It's about like, don't keep what's happening to you a secret, put it out there on the internet. Like, the only way we're going to solve these problems is by making them known to people.
I think it's a good reminder. Oh, sorry.
It's just disheartening.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder that places that we view as being very liberal, like California, are not exempt from this kind of white supremacist behavior.
Yeah, and the part that broke my heart was what it must feel like to like, you're going into a job to promote BIPOC artists and to change the injustices that a predominantly white party is doing. And then you have to make the decision of your heart of hearts that it's time to leave and that you are not being useful there and they're not appreciating you. And like, because I think so many people stay in a miserable job because they're fighting the good fight. And so it's sort of this question of when is it time to leave and how can you be useful elsewhere? Because clearly this company was not willing to change while she was there.
It's that funny thing where people, generally white people, going, you're not going about this the right way. And this is kind of what I think they think the right way is. And you can't do change like that because you're just going to get steamrolled.
It's the lack of transparency. There were some comments about how from in the article, how she was not allowed to have conversation in the chat for Zoom meetings during meetings. So like they weren't allowed to speak, and how whenever she would find something and bring it to upper management, they would say like, okay, you shouldn't speak up when you find something like that. It's not a good look for you. People are going to like be against you. So it's best for you in the company and your career to like, point these things out, which is just ridiculous. And one of the student comments pointed out of all the companies that have issued diversity statements, so few have actually done things to their company or even talked about actual physical changes, especially after we see white American theater. They spent so much time and labor giving white theater makers a framework for change, and it's sad to see companies not picking it up and doing something with it, which is what I think it's really about, is the transparency.
I think kind of going back to the last article, seeing success in a workplace for the marginalized, you need to have that reflected in the leadership, right? And I think, like you were saying, Izzy, like, why should we stay in miserable places that are killing us because we think that we have to, or that like, if we're not there, then who else is going to do it? And I think it's just one of those instances where it's like, yeah, probably just kind of like scrap that, like, we'll just leave that there where it is and we'll go leave and then maybe find another place that's going to have change happen or something. It's just, in the middle of a pandemic, nonetheless, it's like, if you don't see any like humanity or compassion, I think you might be out of luck there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they say, you're more likely to be changed by a bad job than you are to change it. You got to get out.
And people like in a pandemic, they don't say this in the article, but what's going on in the background is people are like scared for their lives during a pandemic of losing their job. And in these like times is when you really see how prevalent racism still is, because the white power is winning and they're the first people that are getting fired, or they're squeezing people out. They're almost always people of color and the people that are the newest ones there. And they don't really think about like the emotional impact and the social impact that it's going to have on their company. Because especially like we said, being in California, which is supposed to be this like liberal, inclusive state, this is like so sad to see.
In the arts, no less.
In the arts, and it's going to be known. People are going to be talking about this.
Well, I guess speaking of problems within the arts, that was good.
Yeah, let's do some happy news.
Yes,
Oh, well, I think we have some coming up later, but this isn't it. This is an article in Deadline written by Greg Evans. Headline: Study credits Hamilton for boosting cast diversity, but says gains insufficient for industry hiring problems. So the premise of this is that the first Actors Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion study since 2017 found modest improvements in racial diversity and little improvement elsewhere. And Hamilton, the musical, accounts for most of the gain in hiring people of color across all the various tours and sit-down productions. Women saw a slight increase in hiring from 43.5 to 44.9% of equity roles, but still face unequal pay. In addition, actors over 65 or living with disabilities and non-binary actors are also super underrepresented, accounting for around 1% of equity contracts. In short, I think I just put your numbers together, actually. In short, there has been modest, this is a quote, in short, there has been modest improvement since the 2017 study, meaning that there has been more equitable distribution of contracts and earnings, but most improvements have been extremely gradual, inconsistent, and not enough to change long-time problems in the industry. Actors Equity is planning to do a study like this annually from now on.
I'm not surprised that Hamilton is the reason for the huge boost, considering
I
it's
really thought we were seeing like a
dominating.
Hamilton effect, where everyone was like, "We should be hiring more people of color." And when I at the time, I in the theater community in Chicago, there was this feeling, which is maybe like had some envy associated with it, where I knew actors who were like, "Oh, actors of color are getting all the equity contracts now because it's very in," and everyone's you've heard this kind of sentiment before. But I really thought that it would be that there was at least going to be a Hamilton effect for a few years, where other companies, because I felt like we were trying, like as an industry, we were having this conversation and really trying to be better about casting, and it felt like a lot of companies were putting in this work, and it's disheartening to find out that Hamilton's the only one that actually had any real impact on those numbers.
With how many, there are 2 different tours, 3 sit-down companies, and a predominantly BIPOC cast. There's like 3 white actors in it?
One of the student commenters said 4, but they're mostly ensemble roles.
Other than the king, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little sad that one show can have that much of an effect.
Yeah.
Well, it's sad that it's the show that, I don't think it's directly written in the casting, but it's like, it is meant to be people of color. It is not meant to be white people. So that's sort of, I don't want to say allows, but it like promotes the hiring of people of color, whereas other shows where they can fill anybody, they tend to choose white people. So it's
and it's the success of Hamilton, right? Like, I think that if Hamilton had only been like a modest success, or been the 4th or 5th most talked about show in that Broadway season, I think we could have seen the touring productions be more white than the Broadway production, or like I think that there is this scrutiny and attention that Hamilton, part of the story of Hamilton is that it's this very diverse cast.
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of flashback, like around when the show first came out on Broadway, where they were posting like the casting info for like the roles or whatever, and they would all say like non-white, male, female, this age range. And I think like some white actors were like trying to take some legal action, saying that like that was unethical and that they couldn't, like, and it said non-white, and I'm like, that's like literally the most, like maybe one of the more inclusive like categories you could have
Right.
in terms of casting. And
Well, and acting has been for a long time one of the last areas where you can discriminate in some really specific ways and say we are not looking for people of color, we're not looking for women or whatever, right? Like we accept that it is part of the world of acting.
We've talked a lot in this ART section about I just lost it. Sorry.
I was.
It'll come back to me.
You
speaking
swept the
in
rug.
draft, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Grace, did I cut you off earlier?
No, that was about my thought.
Parker, look what you've done.
I ruined the whole flow.
You ruined it.
But one thing I did want to say about the article that was not what I just started a second ago was that I think it does a really good job of showing that you can't just do the talk, you have to walk the walk too. And that like rough saying, right? Like it shows this has been the past 3 years. And now we're in this big moment of talking about the inequalities and the biases in this industry, the deep biases in this industry. And this article has come at a great time to show, hey, we can see what it looks like to do the work. And this isn't it. This isn't enough. To hopefully motivate to make real change.
Yeah, and I think it helps to have that advocate behind the table too, right? I mean, I feel like the only reason why they were so successful in having a mostly BIPOC cast is just because like you have Lin-Manuel Miranda who's writing it, and like the whole concept behind it is that, you know, let's think about his experience or his, you know, sort of as like a person of color or like an immigrant like in America. And so yeah, like going, like, I think a lot of those places that, you know, talk the talk, can't walk the walk because they don't actually like, I don't know, they're not like truly advocating for these people and fighting for them to be in their shows.
And even in Hamilton, arguably, the casting of Hamilton is part of the gimmick of the show and part of the gimmick of the press for the show. Like it's tied to, you don't like that?
It feels so gross,
right?
But I guess I was thinking about something because in our ART course we had a professor come in and teach us who is a professor at a historically black college, and he brought in some of his students to sing songs by characters who are kind of stereotypically white characters in songs. So hearing an African American man sing oh shoot, what is it?
Waving Through a Window from Dear Evan Hansen.
Yes, that one.
Or like something from like Company, right?
Was,
like
Ella's song from Legally Blonde was kind of really cool, and like that kind of thing where like sometimes that happens, and then the casting of somebody of color, it becomes the gimmick that draws people in rather than it just being that's who they cast as the show.
Well, and it's good to be reminded, what I appreciate about that class that some of us took, it's really good to be reminded that the assumptions that you have that a character needs to be white or needs to not be white, or mostly needs to be white, are not based on fact or based on really anything.
Yeah.
I think there are people who really would argue that Elle in Legally Blonde has to be white, you know, and I think one of the big points of that class was that she does not.
Nowhere.
She's got to be blonde.
Right, she got to be blonde. She
doesn't even have to be blonde. She's legally blonde, not literally blonde.
No, it's a plot point that she dyes her hair or wants to dye her hair from being blonde to brunette. So I think she does have to be blonde.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I was a TA for that course, and I actually worked with that professor in a show at a theater we did, and he's really great. But he brought up this really good point because he showed a lot of like videos of like all black productions of like the Music Man, and it's like, are we celebrating? And he brought up the phrase like, are we celebrating the spectacle of it, right? Like the fact that they did an all black version of the Music Man versus like just celebrating it for like what it is. And I think that's another fine line that major like Broadway or like, you know, Hollywood is very like close to crossing to either side of, you know, authenticity and like how genuine they are about the inclusive casting. And I think you know, as much as we see inclusive casting, there's still like so much happening on the other end. Like, I think, wasn't there a whole like internet drama because Sia made a music video, right, about an autistic person, and then like, but they cast like just like a non-autistic person, and everyone's like,
Neurotypical.
Sia, why did you do that? And she was like, because it was just easier, or essentially just like we couldn't find any actors who were like autistic, like any actors on the spectrum who were like, who could do it. And then I remember just seeing like how poorly she handled it, because people were like, I'm available, Sia, or something. And or it was like, I auditioned for this, and then she just would say like, well, then you must not be a very good actor, which is like crazy that someone could be so blatantly that, I mean, I think that's just like rude on so many levels. So clearly, like, we have not reached that level yet, right, where everyone's on the same page. So
Yeah, I'd rather have an accurate portrayal that's not good at acting than just this offensiveness.
Yeah, I think there's always something a little cringe-inducing about seeing a neurotypical actor try to play an autistic spectrum character. Like, I think you run into this with Different Hansen, of course, but also with Book of Mormon, weirdly, because I think a lot of people end up playing the Josh Gad character as if he's on the spectrum in a way that feels a little offensive sometimes. I think it's really tricky.
We can get into a deep rabbit hole about, you know, these specific characters who, like, is it okay to play somebody on the spectrum? Is it okay to play a trans person if you're cis? Is it okay to play a gay person if you're straight? But, you know, sometimes you don't want to just pigeonhole players or actors who are gay, who are trans, who are on the spectrum.
Right.
Only
Yeah, I think it's incredibly complicated.
Speaking of,
yes. Great, wonderful article. Let's do some happiness. Our work is just starting. 12 LGBTQ artists talk America's future under Biden-Harris. This is written by Stephen Daw on the 13th of November. He goes and interviews 12 LGBTQ artists, including Big Frida, Billy Porter, Bob the Drag Queen, and numerous others who actually I do not know most of these people. Which is more a fault of me not following pop culture than them not being famous, I hope. But it's really nice. First thing that he brings up in the article is the kind of history that was made in Joe Biden's victory speech, being the first president to mention transgender people in a victory speech, and the second person to mention gay people in a victory speech, which is, you know, makes me happy because it's like, yay, representation from my president to say that, well, president-elect, to be like, yes, you exist, you will have rights, and we can move forward and all these kinds of things, which is kind of the general sentiment that all of the artists put forward in their little comments, talking about how, you know, this is a great start. We had, you know, all this darkness and terrible things happening to our community, but now we have those who are in charge, who are in our corner. So Billy Porter made the great comment saying, not to get it twisted, over 70 million people still voted for Trump, which, you know, is still a sobering thought to be like, out of everything that he's done, some people just stick it to the libs, to single issue voters, to people who actually believe in him and his message. It's a little frightening when that gets brought up, which is why, you know, we still have our work cut out for us on the way forward, but we're in much better footing moving forward.
I concur.
Yeah, I think this moment has been interesting because it's a lot of like, there's this balance of thank goodness that the president is going to change, and then also how do we keep up the energy and continue to hold the government to task and make sure that they give us what we need. to be happy and productive and successful and healthy. Perhaps most important.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I've heard those words before somewhere.
Yeah. I don't know. I almost started crying when Biden started talking about gay and transgender people.
Yeah,
partially because it was incoherent sentences. I was like, oh my God, I forgot how much a president's supposed to speak.
Yeah. I saw someone point out that this is the first time in easily a decade or more, 12 years, I guess, we're really going to have a president who is boring, like who isn't a character, who isn't
Joe Biden is
personality.
still a character. Joe Biden is still a character. He's just not a Looney
An interesting
Tune.
character.
He's just not a Looney Tune.
Right. No, that's true. But there's something to be said about and not that he's not charismatic, but he's not a huge personality the way some of the other.
I mean, he's like your cookie cutter, like what you would imagine a
Mhm.
president of America to look like and act like. So
He's a little milquetoast, isn't he?
yeah.
Not a bad thing.
Kamala.
Yes.
I love her.
Woman, African American, Asian American. Here we go.
Pretty incredible. I'm very excited about Kamala.
She's a personality for sure.
Well, speaking of happy things, on a slightly different topic, for those of you that are very into Disney, you may have heard of Fantasia or World of Color, the big light shows at the parks. Well, those are a thing of the past now, and the new show coming to Disney is called Harmonious. And here's how Disney World will hide the tech behind its new show. Written by Robert Niles on Theme Park Insider on March 19th of this month. So essentially, it's another large fountain show in the middle of a park it's at Epcot in Walt Disney World, and I've actually never been to Walt Disney World, but the lagoon, the World Showcase Lagoon, in the center of the park is where this show is going to take place, and the toolkit for the show that needs to be hidden during the daylight is 5 enormous floating platforms, 1 6-story ring structure that houses a water curtain, multiple 25-foot tall double-sided LED walls, 8 54-foot moving arms, moving lights, fountains, and lasers. So this is quite a large show. And during the night or during the daytime, they have these fountains that come in and cover all of the machinery that is used during the show. So there is actually a little picture in the article that shows what the park will look like in the daytime that covers up all of the machinery. So this was actually supposed to open this year, but of course the pandemic set the opening back. There is not a current date for when this show will reappear and open again, but it was announced with these specifics at the D23 Expo.
We love a bit of spectacle.
I'm personally pro Disneyland, having been to both. But I respect the Epcot ball.
My gosh, Epcot has such good food, though. I love Epcot.
I just want
They have these fish and chips that are just delicious.
I guess I haven't been to either park at a point in my life where like I felt like I could spend money on food. You know what I mean? But that's like all I want to do is spend money on food. Expensive food.
That's the perfect park to have this in too, because Epcot's kind of missing the thrill of it all. It's like very much walk in a very big circle and spend $500 on food because everything's so expensive. So, and I feel
I'm
like
always surprised in Epcot when you run into a roller coaster. You're like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, what's the? Not right.
And I think that a lot of times families go to the parks, and the children and the older people of the group usually take the kids to Epcot, or like, oh, you guys go ride the big rides and we'll just go get food in Epcot. So it's exciting that they're investing heavily in a show there.
I used to do some work with Casey Wilkerson, who works at Walt Disneyland, and has told me about kind of how these shows run, and everything's run through a lighting console. So like all of the water fountains, everything is run through a console, and there's like 8 grand MAs in a room, and that's how they program these massive shows. So to me, thinking about how this is done, I'm like, this has got to be the closest thing to like your typical pre-COVID tech that we think of, right? Like all of these designers sitting at a console and programming something, but because it's all there's not human beings in a part of the production, you know, you can get that kind of, it's a different atmosphere. It's closer maybe to what we had before. I don't know. It's an interesting.
Is it
idea.
all recorded or is it being called live?
That I am not aware of. I don't know the answer to that one.
I bet it's all recorded.
It's
and,
got to be
like,
recorded.
It's got to. I think it's recorded too, but I don't know.
That's what I was thinking, which is cool, but it also makes me sad that it's
I
like
bet,
our jobs gone.
I bet it all fires through QLab.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I know that those Disney productions are no joke, and like even I mean, even if there aren't people like, you know, calling cues for the light shows, they've got like the parades and the performances and stuff, and I know that those are like super heavily involved. And I knew this person who was like a costume.
Oh, I bet they still have somebody
Director?
there because if something goes wrong, they're
Yeah.
screwed.
Right, something to like override it to be like,
Nope, I'm taking over now. I bet there's still
Yeah.
a stage manager. I bet there's
There's
still
got to
somebody
be.
there.
Oh, there's got to
Oh,
be.
of course.
In case a
If not
kid
all-
goes
yeah.
into the fountain or something.
What'd you say?
Said in case a kid jumps into the fountain or something.
Oh. I thought you were suggesting that they had to be called something else, like a fountain manager.
Yeah, they should be.
I would take that title.
Something to pop on the resume.
Right.
What did you do at Disney? I fished kids out of the fountain.
They gave me a big net.
like you need to be certified. I was at Lowe's the other day getting like a little Christmas tree, and these like employees were like, "Is Rosie certified to use like the chainsaw yet?" And they were like, "I think so." And she's like, "No, I don't think she is. She needs to be certified like right away." I think. And then I see this like small like woman like carrying this tree, and I was like, "Oh God, I hope that's not Rosie." They're just like, you know, over here in a corner in this garden center, like literally like 5 of them just standing there, and I was like, Rosie is right there.
If that is Rosie.
Give her a
If that is
chainsaw
Rosie.
and just see what happens.
Right. To shift the mood a little bit, this article from Playbill, written by Ruthie Fearberg, is entitled "Why Every Production Should Hire an Intimacy Director." I'm going to read you a quote to start with. As intimacy director Francesca perhaps Betancourt defines, intimacy direction as a whole broadly refers to sexual content, but for me relates closer to sexual content and also violent content, facilitating or supporting any content that feels intimate. So one of the things this article points out is that there's a huge crossover with the world of intimacy direction and violence direction. And then go on to interview an intimacy director and a violence director, both of whom highlight some of the same things. The intimacy director talks about the importance of consent, that an actor can say no to anything that makes them uncomfortable and be open about things that are iffy. And both of them, both the intimacy director and the violence director, highlight the importance of storytelling and the importance of safety and the balance between those two things. A lot of the student comments highlighted, agreed with the article that this was a really necessary, important position to have in most shows, and highlighted the need for this at CMU and everywhere else as well.
Yeah, I think
This
back
kind
to
of-
my first. Oh, go ahead.
There's kind of this like prevalent thought in our community as theater artists that, oh, they're actors. They're always just used to it no matter what, because that's just how they are. But I know even just changing in some choreography can instantly set them off. I dated a girl who ended up being cast in Equus, and that whole process for getting naked on stage, I remember one night, the way it worked is the male character would like take off a piece of clothing and she would match him, and like, that's how they would do it. But he took off his clothes in the wrong order, and then she became uncomfortable, and like it was like ruined for a week. They had to like cut back and everything. in rehearsals.
Definitely
Yeah,
needs to be taken seriously.
Oh, sorry.
I was just saying it definitely needs to be taken seriously because I'm one of the theater people who had never acted and have absolutely no desire to be on stage. But a lot of times, like school programs will make you take an acting class. And in my undergrad was an acting class, and it was by no means somebody getting naked in front of me, but like I was put in a scene where the director, like improv style, I basically had to kiss somebody in my class, and I'm not an actor. Like there was no prep, there was no intimacy direction. It was just like
Go
They
ahead.
didn't even have to brush their
it's
teeth.
just like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if Izzy had to kiss this person because I told her to? And so it was like a really uncomfortable thing. And so I'm always impressed whenever I see actors do anything intimate on stage because that's so outside of my comfort zone that I'm just like applaud them for being able to get to that place. So I really hope that intimacy direction gets more and more substantial and that there's at least like a conversation. Because I know some actors definitely don't care, like they're able to get into character, it doesn't affect them afterwards. But for a lot of actors, I would assume are similar to me, where like that means something. And unless there's like dialogue and transparency and communication, you're never going to be able to act as well as you would. And there might be trauma afterwards from just like the vulnerability.
The article also gets at this belief that some people have that what if you like really choreograph intimacy, then it's going to read as stale and rehearsed. And the intimacy director interviewed really pushes against that. She says it's when actors have the guidelines and know that they're going to be safe that they're able to put more energy into the acting, into the emotion of it.
And I completely agree.
Can't act.
I completely agree with that. Like, I think that I think back to the first time I encountered like an intimacy director. I mean, in high school and college, I was a bit of an actor, and I had put myself in those situations, or I found myself in those situations where the director was like, "Go out in the hallway and figure it out," right? Like the tagline when we talk about intimacy direction, right? And then I got to my senior year of college, and I had heard that a new director, actually, who did his undergrad at CMU, had come in to be the intimacy director on a production of Proof because there was an intimate scene and the actors hadn't done something like that before. And I remember going to see the production, and I had never seen something look so real and believable. And I talked to the director, right, and like found out what intimacy direction was before seeing the show, and looking at it with that lens, like I had truly never seen something that looked so real and yet knew it was so safe. Like it was very, it was awesome. And I am a strong advocate for intimacy directors as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's completely related, but I think like most of us have probably worked at a summer stock type thing. I think of how many actors I see get in show relationships or like carry their relationship on stage home, and then it ends up like not working out almost all the time. So I think intimacy direction too is important for those things and like making sure that your heart is protected outside of the show, because I'm sure a lot of those relationships were just because they weren't guarding themselves, and they could have saved themselves a lot of like emotional heartbreak if they were separating it. So I think it's important for every theater just to take care of their actors.
I think it's really important to create like a very distinct divide between like rehearsal that's being run by like the director, right, versus like an intimacy director. Because I think there are some like gray areas where people who aren't equipped to handle certain scenes that even like, hint around some sort of like, whether it's like verbal abuse or something like that can also be, I think, be really damaging and traumatizing. So it's really important to like, I don't know, like, right, like the transparency is like, okay, as long as we're all on the same page about it and like know what it is we're doing, it won't be as bad as if we all just pretend like it's not happening or something like, whether it's like I took the ART course that's like the in practice where like it's around like a production, and we had to read this script, and like one of the scenarios was like the director wants them to do an exercise where they like basically like like tear each other down, and then like one actor, and in the script there's a scene where like a white actor spits on a black actor, and like the black actor's like, I don't want to do that, and they're like, well, why not, and it's just like thinking of those, like even those things, right? Because it's like, oh, it's fine, it's just like just mimic it, and it's like, but yeah, but like what does it feel like to be, have someone miming spitting at you every night, especially when you're playing like a maid and they're like, a superior. So
And I think that's how it gets so closely tied to fight direction, because it's a similar process as it is, and those worlds are often seen together.
mistake and you get hurt. Doesn't matter if it's, a physical wound or a mental, emotional wound. Look at us talking about actor things. Let's talk about tech things. CMU students light up the stage remotely. This is a very lovely article written by Julie Matera for the general public here at Carnegie Mellon University, talking about the way the lighting design students here at the School of Drama have been working around and doing their remote work. They set up a remote console that students could get into, and from the comfort of their own home, they could actually program and in the lighting console and see that in real time in the Wells studio theater and the lighting studio up on the second floor, which I think is really kind of cool that they have this ability to still do something physical where they learn how to actually get their hands on a console and see how the lights get affected on people and clothing and situations in real time, which I don't think is something you could do without that. So that's kind of important for their learning goals and their time here in school. I know us in the sound department, we do everything on our computers anyways through a pair of headphones or desktop studio speakers, so we can do it from anywhere. So it's nice to see how the other departments are handling all of this.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it makes me jealous, but I also am grateful and happy for them, because I think, Evan can probably relate that a lot of us scenic designers, we don't really want to do digital design. So we're missing and we're mourning our careers in a lot of ways. So it makes me happy to see that there are people still being able to if we're not able to do what we want to do, I'm happy to see that other people are finding ways to do this and being interactive. Because then I feel like theater can prevail.
Do you all still create models and things back just in your apartments, or do you just not have?
Yeah, it depends on what we're doing. I did a theoretical class piece where I made a SketchUp model, so a digital model, which I definitely learned a lot, but I typically make hand models, but it just doesn't make sense without the studio space. And then I'm working on a show that's a Zoom show or a digital show. And for that, we're probably not going to have a model because it's a whole different world. We're not in a specific space. It's going to be
Are you not going to design a theoretical production of it if it was
no, we are
not online?
No. It's our third time designing it because of the world. And so we're just going to put forward what we're doing now.
Do you normally, in a non-COVID world, do you normally do more, model building than, digital rendering?
Yeah, I definitely do. It depends on the designer, but I'm not a screen person. So it's been a very interesting time for me because thankfully I'm learning all these skills that and I'm glad I'm doing it while I'm in school and have the resources of CMU, because I know they'll be expected of us moving forward in assisting people, but I'm definitely more of a hands-on collage glue stick type of person. So
I get the feeling that some of the professors, and it's my first semester here, it has been, so I don't know that this is the case, but I get the feeling that the professors like to have a really hands-on interaction with student work, with models, be able to move things around and crouch down and look at things. So there's been this loss of being here's a flat picture that I took with my iPhone, so you can see what the model looks like when it's in my apartment. And it's so I'm glad that the lighting students can affect, even when they are not physically near, can affect the lighting in the room that their professor is in.
Definitely. And I can imagine QLab typically happens in the Wells also. And I can see it's a class where stage managers practice calling. And because this remote lighting console is set up in the same location that QLab typically is, I can see that definitely helping remote students practice calling shows as well as stage managers, which is
Does anyone know how lighting designers are doing color changes, if they're doing color changes? Are they like?
They've got a bunch. They got a few LED and other intelligent fixtures up
Okay.
there, as well as scrollers. So I think that's
Okay, so they can still do that even if they're not in the
Yeah.
state. That's cool.
Well, I guess related to live performance, our next article is titled SAG-AFTRA reaches deal with actors' equity over live performance.
Week
And,
3.
yeah, so this was published on variety.com, written by Dave McNary. It's a very concise article, and it's all in the title that SAG-AFTRA and actors' equity have reached a deal over live performance. So with a lot of theater going on Zoom, and you also have a lot of like also at like a
Hamilton's.
Hollywood level, things being put online for people to stream. It's obviously a very confusing time for SAG-AFTRA and actors equity, because who holds jurisdiction over what. And it's a little weird because it's the way the article phrases it says that the settlement calls for preserving SAG-AFTRA's historic jurisdiction while allowing actors equity to cover this work during the pandemic period with a term concluding December 31st, 2021. And I was reading some of the student comments, and they were all very similar. Like this is kind of like a weird way of like wording it, and it's still like a tricky situation, and it's still not a solution. It's very much like a band-aid over this issue. So I guess we'll see how this continues to play out, because I think
imagine
we're
they
only
see
going
it-
to keep seeing like distributions on streaming services to continue to go up. So
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was interesting about this article was that it's the first time that we've seen a lot of people have suggested deadlines for when the pandemic will end. So they're like, oh, the New York Broadway is closed until this time, or we can't gather in public until this time. And it's the first time I've seen someone say this provision will exist through the entire year of 2021. Like that I think that's a huge step. I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's I'm glad that they had at least that much foresight, and I guess we'll have to see if they have to push it further than that. I hope they will not.
It will certainly come back. You're like totally right, Grace. I think that we will continue to see lots about this dispute and lots about, especially as we get closer to that date next year, depending what the state of the world looks like.
yeah, I think in this period, like dates and timelines are just totally arbitrary. Like it's this like false sense of hope. I think it gives people like a false sense of hope and security. Like, oh, we'll have a vaccine in 5 months. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't mean like that means nothing to me. Like, tell me when we've had 0 cases in a day, and then I'll start feeling good. But like,
Yeah.
It's like when you go on a road trip with your parents and you keep asking, are we there yet? And your dad, we'll get there when we get there.
Right. I mean, it sort of harkens back to the article last week from that Broadway producer Ken Davenport, talking about a lot of people. Just because we have the vaccine doesn't mean that people are going to be ready to come back to the theater. Those are two different things. And we're going to enter into this weird territory where people are going to say, how do I make people tell me that they're vaccinated before they come into my theater? Can I legally make people tell me that they're vaccinated?
Yeah, and it's definitely not the whole industry is going to open. It's going to be this weird like layout of things. I have a friend who is an ASM for a Broadway touring company. Mm-hmm. And they basically told her the absolute soonest they would even consider starting is fall of 2021. So it's just terrifying.
And that seems early to me.
Yeah.
We just got to put on our hats of cynicism, and just pretend like this is going to last forever so that we're not disappointed when they continue to extend these lockdowns or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to remember what we're grateful for, which brings us to our next article, Thanks and Giving.
Good segue.
Brilliant.
By Carrie Reed. And it's an article that just makes us feel good and reminds us how far we've come and how much has changed as people have been reflecting and being grateful over the Thanksgiving weekend. And it basically, the article talks about how grateful theater people are and how grateful he is for how many performance companies have continued to create for the digital world. And it sort of just points at the fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was focused on just create content. Like, people are sad and people are stressed and unable to go out, and nobody's ever been in a scenario like this before. So just get out whatever you can. So some shows were just like filming and sending it out. Other ones were creating like tiny mini shows or mini series. But then as this has progressed, people haven't just continued with that standard, waiting for things to open. They've been like upping themselves. And we're to the point now where productions are actually starting new companies. There are theater companies that are just starting, and their whole company is based around making high quality, like cinematic live theater. And it's just pointing out how artists will prevail and we'll find our audience and we'll find a way to continue making work. So while many remain anxious about the state of live art this Thanksgiving, I'm also grateful for everyone who found a way to keep it going, is the way that he ends the article.
Humans are rather adaptable creatures, aren't they?
Yes.
I think they are. Despite what I said earlier about watching theater online, I definitely am keeping this article open so I can check out some of the things they mentioned, because they call it a bunch of specific offerings that are still available online that sounded really interesting. And they call out my undergrad alma mater too. So
yeah, I like that, because one of the things that's been hardest for me, I'm in a different time zone than Pittsburgh right now. And the thing that makes live theater so different than film is the live aspect. So a lot of these online performances have been maintaining that by, you have to be there at a specific time and you pay your money and you show up. Whereas that's not very conducive for my current lifestyle and current level of stress. I'm more of like a stream it later type of gal. So it's been difficult for me to catch this live theater. So I'm excited whenever I hear about one that has a larger window of time, like it's here for a week and you can click on it whenever, or sometimes like more immersive pre-recorded things. But I'm also really admire companies that are focusing on live theater, because they are going into it knowing they're not going to get as big of an audience.
Well, on that thankful note, thank you everybody for joining us this week. We'll see you next week. This has been News from the Real World.